In the summer of 2015, I was 33 years old, broke and jobless in Mexico City. My entire life had gone steadily down the drain for the past couple of years, and my best friend had moved back to Europe. I was tired and bored, so when my online friend Harold, who I had met in person 2 years before, invited me to spend a month in his farmhouse in Norway, I accepted without hesitation. The deal was simple. In exchange for some work at the farm, I would get some pretty sweet holidays in a country I always wanted to visit. I have no problem doing labor work, and in fact, I was looking forward to doing it and getting my body back into real action. Since I moved back to Mexico City from Canada in 2011, I'd been feeling rusted and soft, so I packed my suitcase, put on my boots, and said goodbye to Mexico City the best way I knew how, by getting piss drunk. I arrived in the city of Stavanger, Norway, but my suitcase decided to go to Thailand instead. So after an hour, filing the reports and giving the address of my friend's house, I was able to walk out and meet him again. Harold was standing there, confused and annoyed. He told me later he was about to leave the airport, thinking I had decided not to take the flight after all. I guess I was lucky he didn't leave. That night, I spent it with Harold and his friends in an oceanfront apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Stavanger, getting drunk in Norwegian beer and smoking hash. Discussing shit, if you ask me. I prefer the real thing. But regardless, I felt welcomed and content. The next day, Harold drove me all the way to his farmhouse, about an hour south of Stavanger, in a community called Egersund. At least I think that's the name of the place I was in. Norwegian names and addresses are weird if you're not familiar with them. The land Harold owned was huge and beautiful. Not really sure how it all works, but on his property, there's a lighthouse that attracts a lot of tourists from all over Europe. The house itself was small, located on top of a hill, with a huge barn next to it. Harold lived alone in the 2-story house, but I was told the basement housed a tenant. As soon as I glanced into the basement window, I got a strange feeling of dread. There was a webcam facing the driveway, and the rest of the window was covered by boxes and papers, but I decided not to mention it since Harold didn't seem to care. I just assumed the guy was an eccentric man, or maybe just a normal precaution, considering we were more or less in the middle of nowhere, with neighboring houses separated by big fields. I just took my mind out of it and focused on the joy of being in Norway. After settling in one of the bedrooms upstairs, I was informed that Harold's son's wedding was going to be celebrated, and thus the house would be filled with the bride's family from Bergen. I enjoyed meeting the bride's family, and after some shenanigans, everybody had gone to sleep. But Harold and I were still up chatting and drinking beer. It was then that I got to meet the tenant in the basement, Olaf. Harold had been having some troubles with his new smartphone, and apparently Olaf was tech-savvy and had been the one purchasing the phone for Harold. Now, Harold kept telling me he didn't like Olaf, and was actually upset by the way Olaf kept the newly remodeled basement. But from what I understood, they had some kind of relationship more than just landlord and tenant. The basement was dark, all the windows were covered, and piles of junk cluttered the entire place. The bedroom was full of electronic and computer parts. Olaf invited us to sit down and turned on a desk lamp to check Harold's phone. I was able to get my first real good look of him. He was in his mid-40s, but looked significantly older. He had a shaved head, was very skinny, had a big nose, and deep shadows under his eyes. He spoke with a severe stutter as well. Olaf had the entire look of a meth addict, which I would know since I used to work in a recovery house back in my hometown. People dealing with severe addictions typically had similar features. My gut was telling me this guy was trouble, so I was always wary around him. Olaf finished with Harold's phone and then directed his attention to me. He randomly asked me if I wanted to see some porn, to which I declined entirely, as I just wanted to leave that dark basement. Harold drunkenly laughed and asked Olaf if he had gay porn, to which Olaf said he didn't care about the sexuality of his videos. He simply liked to see people, quote, get things introduced in them. Chills ran down my spine when he said that, and I thought to myself if he meant it in just a sexual way, or if there was a more ominous meaning to it. Regardless, we didn't stay to find out. Harold had a busy day the next day, and I was tired and thoroughly creeped out by Olaf. When we were back in the house, I asked Harold if he trusted Olaf, to which Harold answered that he wasn't his friend. He said he was just an addict, renting the basement. The government paid Harold the rent, and a nurse visited him twice a week to bring him his medication. After dropping that piece of info, he bid me goodnight and went into his bedroom. I tried not to think about Olaf, but my gut feeling about him wouldn't let me relax. The first time he came up from the basement was to give me a flash drive with movies he had illegally downloaded from the internet. He made sure to emphasize the illegal part. The second time he came up, he seemed high and simply wanted to let me know if there was anything I needed. I need only ask. He did mention, however, not to tell Harold about him ever going upstairs. When the wedding was over and all the bride's family left, the encounters with Olaf became even stranger and more frequent. One time while I was in the kitchen fixing myself some breakfast, I turned around to find Olaf standing at the kitchen door, bleeding from his nose, staring at me. I nearly jumped out of my skin and dropped my breakfast, making a huge mess. Oddly, he didn't seem to notice and was just babbling incoherently while directing his cloudy eyes to the ceiling above my head. He was so odd that it petrified me to think what actions could elicit a violent response from him. Since that day, I started locking the door whenever I was alone in the house. I eventually told Harold about all this, and he got visibly mad and went downstairs to talk/yell at Olaf. As it turns out, Harold had tried to kick him out several times, but the government had always ruled against evicting Olaf. I then found out that Harold's sister was mostly responsible for Olaf staying there. She felt bad for the guy, simply because he had the same name as her father. Thus, Harold had to learn to live with him in his basement, but only because Olaf was supposed to be clean and in treatment for his addiction. After Harold confronted him, Olaf stopped being friendly with me and became a cold, invasive presence in my life the rest of my time there. There was a day when I was in the barn chatting with a couple of Harold's friends, when Olaf entered the barn to place his laptop and some homemade-looking gadget by the window. Despite nobody acknowledging him, he interrupted our conversation and started explaining how his tool was used to hack into people's networks to get their Wi-Fi passwords. He proceeded to give me a nasty glare and then stormed out. I told Harold's friends about my encounters with him and mentioned how afraid I was of him, as well as having this feeling that he would attack me one day. They told me it was unlikely to happen, but if I ever felt I was in real danger, I could give them a call, and they would pick me up. We exchanged numbers, and they left shortly afterward. The next few days, things between Harold and I turned sour, mostly because I wasn't feeling safe anymore, and because I had expressed my wish to instead go to Germany to visit the man who is now my husband. Apparently, Harold had hoped for us to grow closer, but I received no hint of that. His severe alcoholism put me off anyway, and he spent most nights getting pissed drunk. Regardless, the situation with Olaf made me exhausted, and I didn't want to deal with being there anymore. I had worked hard on the farm as promised, and it was time to move on. The night I decided to organize my flight to Germany from Norway, Harold went out to, yet again, get drunk and didn't come back until the morning. I had tried to stay up so I could talk with him, but I eventually fell asleep. A few hours later, I woke up to the sound of the front door being closed, and I caught a glimpse of him walking towards the barn, with his dog and a six-pack of beers. I then tried to send him a message through Facebook, but I saw that the internet was down. That's weird, I thought. The whole time I had been there, the internet was never down once. I went to the router and restarted it a couple of times, but to no avail. I decided to leave it alone, thinking Harold was being childish about me leaving and disabled it somehow to inconvenience me. I went downstairs to the bathroom, undressed, and jumped in the shower, ready to refresh myself. Halfway through the shower, a loud bang came from the front door, followed by someone screaming my name. I assumed it was Harold, pissed drunk and angry. I let out a sigh, not looking forward to potentially having an argument with him about me leaving. But as I was turning off the shower, the bathroom door slammed open, and to my horror, there stood Olaf, a completely deranged expression on his face, and wielding a large box cutter. I was paralyzed for what seemed like forever. I couldn't scream or move. I just stared at the box cutter, which he kept retracting and protracting. I was about to pass out when Olaf's screams brought me back to the gravity of the situation. He was yelling, accusing me of playing with Harold's feelings. He was calling me a thief, liar, a filthy Mexican, and then threatened to cut me open if I tried to take anything from Harold. I'm typically a passive person, but it just pisses me the hell off whenever someone calls me a thief or a liar. My fear began to turn into anger, and then my training from the recovery house in Canada kicked in. When dealing with crazed addicts, make eye contact, keep your hands down so you don't startle them, speak in a calm but dominant voice, and always refer to them by their name. So that's what I did, despite the fear of being stabbed to death. I stared at him in his cloudy, crazy wide-open eyes and said, "Olaf, you're the thief. You're the one who keeps stealing Harold's silverware, Olaf. You're the one who keeps breaking in his house, Olaf. Harold is not your friend, Olaf. Harold doesn't even want you living here." It was a long shot, but it worked. My words confused him, and I was able to take a single small step forward, making him take one small step back. He then started giving me some warning thrusts with a box cutter, aiming for my chest and neck. I could feel the cold sweat dripping on my back and a burning void forming in my stomach every time he launched the knife forward. But I didn't flinch. I stood my ground and kept repeating the same words to him. Every time I took another step, I pushed him little by little out of the bathroom. Olaf might have noticed what I was doing, but by then, it was too late. As he took the last step out of the bathroom doorframe, I moved as fast as my terrorized body allowed me to and slammed the door into his nose. I locked it immediately and pushed against it with all my body weight, while a storm of curses, punches, and kicks rained on that little farmhouse door. I remember praying to God for this damn door to not fall apart and keep this psycho addict outside. There was nothing I could use in that bathroom to defend myself against an infuriated, knife-wielding psychopath. After what seemed to have been an eternity, I felt one last super strong kick to the door, and then, to my relief, he stormed out of the house, slamming the front door as he left. However, I stayed put for another 20 minutes, not able to breathe or think about anything else than keeping that door closed. I wanted to puke. Eventually, though, my senses came back, and I knew I had to act quickly. I opened the door of the bathroom, flew upstairs, got dressed, and then exited the house through the window to the garden. I knew Olaf could hear me moving on the first floor, and he had his stupid camera keeping an eye on the driveway. I jumped to the garden, hopped the fence, and ran around the house to the barn. I kicked and banged and screamed for Harold to let me in, but it was useless. The drunk fuck was living his drama, and I needed help. So, I ran all the way to the next house where his sister lived, rang the bell, and when she opened, I explained to her as best as I could what had just happened. She didn't speak a word of English, so it was a comical exchange for about 10 minutes. Eventually, she was able to understand, and her expressions shifted from confusion to absolute terror, mirroring my own. We walked to the barn, she unlocked the door, and commanded Harold to guard me while she went straight to the basement to confront Olaf. I was shocked and shaking, still trying to explain to Harold what had just happened. His drunken state was gone by the time I had finished explaining. He too went to the basement, and I could hear them screaming at Olaf together. They forced him out of the basement, and Harold's sister got her husband so they could take him to the police station. Harold stayed with me the rest of the day. I ended up drinking so much beer, but I simply couldn't get drunk. I wanted to forget, but I couldn't. I was told later that Olaf admitted to having the knife, and that his intentions were to make me fight him. Clearly, he wanted a legitimate excuse to stab me. After all, he did mention before he liked to see people have things introduced in them. The next morning, I went to the police to file a report, but even the cops seemed baffled and couldn't believe something like that could ever happen in their small, peaceful, picture-perfect community. But they believed me, and the officer who took my statement asked if there was somewhere I could go while they sorted out the mess with Olaf. I told them that I was planning to go to Germany the very next day. That last day, I barely spoke to Harold. I didn't blame him, but he told me that in his drunken state, he had told Olaf I was leaving, and he was sad about it. Since Olaf had been doing drugs all night, he thought he had to, quote, defend Harold. Thus, he cut off the internet, waited for me to go in the shower, and planned to, quote, take care of me. I left Norway without a single word. I didn't look back. They told me I could testify via Skype whenever the trial started, so they took my information and promised me justice would be served. It's been more than a year now, and I never heard back from the police. When I asked Harold about it, he told me the police dropped the case for lack of evidence, and Olaf is back in Harold's basement doing whatever it is he does. Life goes on. I was angry for a while, but even anger goes away after a while if there's nothing to burn. Now, all I can do is try to focus on the good things in life. I look at every day as a gift or a chance, but the shadow of fear never really left me. Whenever I'm out in public, I'm constantly on alert, looking over my shoulder, and always studying people around me just in case I have to defend myself. I still have a sense of dread whenever I take a shower, especially at the gym, where I'm more vulnerable. I can't help thinking that anyone else would have ended up as a bloated corpse in a pool of blood in that shower unnoticed for hours if I hadn't thought and acted as quickly as I did. I keep thinking that had I done anything different, that corpse could have been me. I don't know how I'll ever get rid of those thoughts, but what I do know is that Olaf is free, and I really, really don't want to meet him again.